Sorry guys, I'm trying to capture Pidgey. I promise though, Pokemon Go is not impacting my ability to make these... Ooh, another Pidgey. Guys, yesterday at 4:41 a.m., that's a rough estimate, something amazing happened. I hit 50,000 subscribers. That's halfway to 100,000 subs. Now granted, 100,000 isn't a million, 50,000 isn't 500,000, but it's still, in and of itself, a huge milestone for me personally. I never expected to get this far on YouTube. As per usual, I want to thank every single one of you guys. And the whole reason that I merged this review with my 50,000 subscriber video special is because I figured, what better time to review the Steven Universe unaired pilot episode than as a milestone special. And hey, it gave me an excuse to actually watch the Steven Universe unaired pilot episode, which I hadn't done. I read a summary of the plot, I'd seen screenshots, I'd watched the clip of Steven performing the opening theme song, but I had never actually watched the entire episode beginning to end. So to me this was almost like watching a new episode of the show that I had just never bothered to take interest in before. And I gotta say guys, this was a pretty fun experience. The episode itself was very simple. It was only like 8 minutes long, I think, and some of that time was eaten up by Steven performing the opening theme song to the show. Not the entire extended theme song, just the beginning part that we got in the extended theme song. So when it came to just straight up plot, there wasn't a lot there. Basically, the Crystal Gems, without Steven of course, because this is set at about the same time in Steven's life as Gemglow would later be set. The Crystal Gems have been fighting these electric skull things, apparently inside the temple, which in the pilot is called the Crystal Palace, and trying to retrieve some kind of object, but we don't know yet what that is. And Steven wishes that he could go with them on their missions, of course, because that was the thing early in Steven Universe. And Amethyst starts kind of ribbing on Steven, and surprisingly enough, Pearl actually gets in on the ribbing a little bit herself, calls him a clown, which was unexpected. But Garnet tells them to stop making fun of Steven, and he goes to buy a donut at the Big Donut, and he gets his money from Amethyst, which obviously isn't how it works in the actual series. But when she hands him the money, Amethyst also hands him the object that the Crystal Gems retrieved from the Electric Skulls. And it's the legendary Glass of Time that we will see later in the regular series in the episode Steven and the Stevens. Now granted, it's not actually called the legendary Glass of Time, and the design isn't exactly the same, and the circumstances of retrieving it obviously isn't the same, but it's very clear that it's intended to be the same object. It's intended to be the object that the legendary Glass of Time in the regular series was based on. So Steven heads across the street. It's literally just across the street to the Big Donut in this reality. And he orders a donut from Lars and Sadie, and Lars makes fun of him. And it isn't until Steven leaves the building that he thinks of the perfect comeback to Lars's joke. And he wishes that he had thought of the comeback in time to come back with it. And the legendary Glass of Time responds, taking Steven back to the point when Lars made his joke, which was right before Steven had picked up his bag of donuts. And Steven is able to give his comeback, and he is immensely satisfied, but then Lars comes back with something else. And it isn't until Steven leaves the building that he thinks of the comeback for Lars's comeback. So he activates the legendary Glass of Time to go back again, once again, to that point right before he picked up the bag of donuts, so that he can go through the exchange with Lars again and give his new comeback. And he heads home, and the Gems are immensely surprised when he tells them that he used the legendary Glass of Time, and Pearl explains that now that the legendary Glass of Time has been activated, it can only be used for its designated purpose, for the purpose that Steven chose for it, which is giving comebacks to people. But because it was used, the Electric Skulls are going to try to return now and reclaim it. And sure enough, a storm starts brewing outside, and an Electric Skull appears, and it's very big and powerful and has these tentacles that are kind of made out of its hair. And the Gems start fighting it, but they're very clearly being outmatched. Garnet is the only one who can really stand up to it. However, as the fight started, Garnet looked flat out at Steven and said, "Steven, why are you such a buttface?" And so later, when the fight has reached a point where the Gems really aren't doing well, and Steven knows that, he remembers that, thinks of the perfect comeback to what Garnet had said, and is taken back to that point so that he can tell her and the other Crystal Gems what they need to do to avoid losing to the Electric Skull. He proves himself a genuine asset to the team in that moment because he used real ingenuity to solve the problem without anyone else having to tell him how to do it. And he ends up saving the Gems. But in that instant, he thinks of the perfect comeback to the joke made about him earlier in the episode at the very beginning, and is taken back to before any of this actually happened. At which point he gets frustrated and smashes the legendary Glass of Time, meaning that none of the events the rest of the episode will happen, as they happened. Guys, this was such a fun episode to watch. I had no idea. Yes, the art style is very different. Yes, some aspects of the characterization are a little rough, and some aspects of the creative direction were very clearly different at this point in time. But all of the elements that make Steven Universe great are there. This felt like a lost episode of the first season of the show. And while I gotta say I like the animation that we get in the main series later on much better than this, there is something really appealing about the character designs at this point. Garnet, especially with her hair down, just looks really cool to me. But the thing that actually jumped out at me the most in this episode, and I'm sure a lot of you have already guessed, was the legendary Glass of Time. If you recall back in my review of Steven and the Stevens, I didn't have a lot good to say about the legendary Glass of Time because of just how powerful it is implied to be. It isn't given any clearly defined limits, and it can duplicate entire people and erase entire timelines. It's absolutely insane. In fact, if I recall correctly, that review went something like this. This episode is stupid and you're stupid for liking it. Yeah, that seems to be about right. But here in this episode, the way that the same object is used is infinitely better. I made a point of mentioning that Steven goes back to the point right before he picked up his bag of donuts each time he resets time in order to come back to Lars, because I want to point out that the legendary Glass of Time in this reality does duplicate the donut bag. Steven is still holding the bag that he left the building with, but there's a bag of donuts waiting for him on the counter each time he goes back. But Steven himself, his clothing, the Glass of Time itself, none of that is duplicated, which sets a clear limit for the power of the legendary Glass of Time. It can duplicate simple objects, but not itself, not something that's too complex, and not people. It also doesn't seem to be able to affect entire timelines and create entire new timelines the way that the one in the main series does. It just creates closed time loops. And the fact that it can only be used for the purpose that it is initially activated for, until some undisclosed time later on, I would imagine when it's reset, prevents it from being used as some kind of super weapon, the way that I suggested it might be used in that original review of Steven and the Stevens. Whereas the Glass of Time in Steven and the Stevens was a terrible example of time travel in a narrative that doesn't usually use time travel, this one is a great example of time travel. What happened? Guys, from now on, my headcanon is that this is basically what happened in Steven and the Stevens. That Steven and the Stevens didn't actually happen. They went to that underwater temple, found the legendary Glass of Time, and then Steven used it for comebacks. And that is a sentence that I genuinely never thought I would ever say. Guys, obviously I loved this episode. There are some problems with it. Like I said, it's clearly not as developed as the rest of the show, and I really do not like the animation style here overall, but I can definitely see why the series was picked up based on this pilot episode. And if any of you haven't seen the pilot, I definitely recommend that you go out, find it somewhere online, and watch it. Of course, if you have seen the pilot episode, what did you think of it? Let's get a discussion going in the comment section down below. Either way, this has been AJ22, and I will talk to you guys later.